Whenever someone starts out playing Shmups, I'm sure it's never long before they start hearing the name Cave getting bandied about. A lot. And a perfectly natural question to ask is, what is the big deal with Cave? And what is it about their games that makes people go on about them so much? And the answer is actually perfectly simple, although it may sound a little disingenuous at first, because the answer is everything. Like really everything. And Espgaluda II, which Livewire, who are behind this Switch port, kindly provided me with a copy of, is as good an example as any of what I mean by that. Like many Cave shmups, Espgaluda II has a really detailed and quite unusual story behind it. Now, I don't care about it that much and I won't bore you with the details, but someone somewhere did care, and while it may not seem like an important part of a shmup, I think it probably is important in the development process to provide first the inspiration for and then the consistency of the world and characters. We can see this through various attractive pieces of key art which you can set as wallpapers, and of course in the stage backgrounds, which exhibit a kind of painterly quality not dissimilar, although of far higher definition, to some of those in Pro Gear. The world has a steampunk aesthetic that is carried off to perfection, and just like the enemy designs, backgrounds are filled with variety and detail, and everything is just downright beautiful pretty much the whole way through. You fly over European-ish looking towns, some ruined, others more prosperous, naval bases and military installations with an increase in technological threat evident as you progress. I especially loved the early part of stage 6, and yes, there are 6 stages here, making it quite long for a Cave game, where you fly through some sort of control room with surveillance monitors running clips of your earlier battles. There are also all sorts of little set pieces, especially before boss or mid-boss fights, that add a little bit of a sense of drama to proceedings without ever slowing things down, and the whole thing is really a visual spectacle start to finish. It exhibits an unusually fully realised sense of place for a shmup, and if you pay attention, you really can come away feeling like you know a bit about the whole society of the world the game takes place in. The music too is, as always, of the highest quality. In this case, it's not one of my absolute favourites, although I do really like the arranged version, but if you don't find yourself getting into it as much as some other catchier soundtracks, there's no denying how impressive it is, with its alternately fantastical and then threatening tone, and it's definitely one that grows on you the more you play. So the first thing then that makes people talk about Cave games so much is the absolutely top of the line presentation, with every aspect being quite brilliant. And if that was all, their games would already stand out. But of course that is not all. Aside from presentation, the other side of everything is the games and their systems, and it's really incredible how Cave managed to keep pumping out games, not just at the rate and consistency they did, but always with new and inventive little wrinkles and mechanics, and Espgaluda II is no exception. Despite maintaining that same basic formula of standard shot with quicker movement, and focus shot, in this case called the rapier shot, with slower movement, there is so much else going on in this game. The main 2 additional mechanics are a barrier attack that replaces the standard bomb, and the ability to switch into the Ascension or Kakuse mode. The barrier attack works not dissimilarly to the same attack in Esperade. You press it and briefly become invulnerable, allowing you to absorb enemy bullets and then release them in a forward laser attack. There's a gauge in the bottom left of the screen that depletes each time you use it, and if you just tap the button, you'd probably get about 4 uses out of it before it runs out. However, should you so wish, you can hold the button down and zoom about the screen, scooping up and clearing away far more bullets, at the price of course of a commensurate depletion of your gauge. Ascension mode is a far more unique and also complicated affair. Throughout each stage you collect green gems by killing enemies, with a counter in the top left of the screen that maxes out in most modes at 500. Anytime you have any amount of gems, you can tap a button to enter Ascension mode, with this power then using up gems to keep going. In some modes, entering and exiting Ascension mode clears a small area of bullets immediately around your character. Once in Ascension mode, there are a few things that happen. Firstly, enemy bullets turn purple and both become more numerous, but more importantly slow down significantly, and depending on your character, one or other of your shots will become more powerful. In some versions of the game, Ascension mode also adds an auto bomb functionality to your barrier attack. Defeated enemies now no longer drop gems, but instead drop gold medals which get added to their own counter just below your gem counter. At its most simplistic, collecting gold is the main way you score in the game. As mentioned, when you're in Ascension mode, the gem counter keeps dropping. If it reaches 0, however, instead of returning you to your normal status, enemy bullets will now turn red and become faster. This naturally makes things a whole lot more difficult, but if you can handle it, you can still score well while this is going on. You can also hold down the Ascension button to enter what the game calls the absolute death zone, with this upping the difficulty by adding even more bullets, draining both your gems and gold, but offering skilled players the chance to rack up massive scores by granting big multipliers. Now this brings us to scoring, and basically I'm not going to get into more depth than the above here for several reasons. Firstly, this Switch version of Espgaluda II comes with a ridiculous number of modes, which almost all have at least slightly different systems. Secondly, the game helpfully includes its own set of very in-depth tutorials, and the fact that one of them, that for the Black Label version, extends to 18 separate lessons ought to help you understand why I won't be covering all of that here. Finally, in all honesty, I do not even understand some of it myself. And that for me brings up one of the most central points about Espgaluda II. It is a complex game. It's inventive, it's original, it offers a ton of ways to play for players of various skill levels and styles or preferences of play, but it can also all be almost esoterically complex. Now that of course is not necessarily a bad thing. For people who are willing to really go deep with this game and its variables, my god, there's going to be a hell of a lot to explore and play around with, and the game remains a hell of a lot of fun at the more superficial level of just zipping about blasting stuff and trying to survive. But between those two is where I feel it just slightly misses something. There's not that easy and immediate scoring hook to bring more intermediate players into the fold, and I didn't find it quite as addictive as some of Cave's very best systems at first. That said, I still absolutely love the game and the core mechanics, and I have been enjoying playing around and experimenting with the scoring. I just feel it's something you need to make more of a conscious effort to get into than with some other titles. And besides, scoring is of course something you don't absolutely need to pay attention to at all to enjoy a game anyway. Now, I mentioned the different modes on offer on this release, and it really is insane how much is on offer in this package. You have, of course, the regular arcade mode, which most closely fits what I've described so far. You also have a console mode, which is, I think, just the same as the arcade mode, but with some spruced up visuals. All versions, by the way, as should be obvious from the footage, offer 100% bullet hell style gameplay. The patterns are very, very dense, but slower moving than in something like Mushihime-sama, and the arcade mode is really pretty bloody difficult. There is a novice mode, however, which tones things down considerably, so don't be put off, as with all the tricks at your disposal, the novice mode is pretty easy to not just 1cc, but even to no miss. You then have the Black Label version of the game, which adds Cesare as a new playable character, mixes up the scoring mechanics, and introduces a pretty interesting little addition to the gameplay, whereby you can kind of bump bullets aside. The best way I can think to describe it is if you imagine like a washing up bubble. If you touch it lightly with your finger, it won't burst, but will instead be pushed down very slightly, but if you keep applying pressure, then it will pop. That kind of describes the bubble you have around your character in Black Label, with a gauge at the bottom right indicating how much pressure you can take. Basically, you can edge away a bullet or two if you notice them quickly enough, but they will pop through if you either don't move or try plowing into too many of them. Black Label has its own separate novice version, which again is really great for newer players, and novice modes give you a very useful auto barrier. However, if this makes things too easy, both novice modes can be made more interesting by keeping yourself in the 0 gem ascension state with the faster red bullets. So that's 5 modes so far, but there's also an arrange mode, and this one really mixes things up with enemies now firing a mixture of red and blue bullets. All these bullets can be destroyed, but each of your shot types only destroys one colour. It's a really fascinating system and completely changes up the gameplay, and honestly all that would be required would be a change in backgrounds to call it an entirely new game. I do have to say I find the sound effect for destroying bullets in this mode to be a little bit grating, but it is still an excellent addition. So that's us up to 6 modes, and that's what you'll find when you start the game, but finishing the game once under any conditions will unlock a 7th and final bonus or omake version of the game, which is designed to be a lot easier than arcade. This gives you an auto barrier, but removes the ability to activate it yourself. It also recharges the barrier gauge every time you hit 1000 gold, which happens quite a lot, making omake easier than arcade, but a bit of a step up from the novice modes in terms of difficulty. So basically this release is overflowing with content, and there should be something here for everyone. We also have pretty much the most complete set of external options you could possibly wish for. We have Tate mode, we have stage select with each stage broken down into at least 3 sections. We have a choice of soundtracks, we have a couple of dozen wallpapers, we have the aforementioned incredibly in-depth tutorials, as well as a bunch of gadgets like input visualizations and zoomed in windows of your character. At $20 US or just over £15 in the UK, this is just ridiculous value for money, and I can't think of a single reason why anyone who likes shmups wouldn't snap it up day one. The only thing it's missing is functioning leaderboards, although they are, just as with Mushihime-sama, the previous Livewire release, still visible in the menu. Now, when Mushihime-sama released, I kind of assumed the leaderboards would be activated a few days or maybe a couple of weeks after release. 3 months later, however, and they're still not available, so I'm afraid we have to make the assumption that the same is going to be the case here. I don't know quite what the future plans are in this regard, but at the end of the day, it's a minor blot on an otherwise quite spectacular copybook, and Espgaluda II gets a 9 out of 10 from me, and I consider it an absolutely essential title for any Switch-owning shmup fan to add to their collection. I expect a lot of you are going to have picked this up the second it released, so do let us know your thoughts, and thanks very much for watching. See you next time. Cheers.